Hi folks, in this video I'm going to explain to you why a lease on a car, leasing a new car may not be the best idea for you if you're in the range of income where you're making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. The median family income in America today is about $75,000 a year. So if you're making that kind of money and you're in the market for reliable transportation, you may be tempted to go out and lease a car because you see some offer out there with relatively low lease payments compared to buying a car. And you may be tempted to actually go in and try to get into a lease at the dealers. I'm going to explain to you why I think that is not a good idea if you're in that income range, and why I think you should consider buying a car rather than leasing one. So let's consider a lease where the dealer asks you to put down $2,000 and you get into a 3-year lease, making a payment of $300 a month for 3 years, right? So this is pretty much like you're renting a car for 3 years. In other words, you make all those payments for 3 years. The payments add up to something like $12,800 if you make your $2,000 down payment, $300 a month for 3 years, $12,800, almost $13,000 at the end of the lease, right? Now, what happens at the end of the lease? You have to return the car to the dealer. So basically, all the money that you've paid in towards that car basically vanishes into thin air. So you have nothing to show for all that money that you paid towards that car. You have zero equity buildup in that car. When you buy a car, you make payments towards the loan on that car. But at the end of your loan period, you actually own the car. You're free to do what you want with it. You can sell it to somebody else. You can use it as a trade-in to buy another car. You want to give it to somebody in your family, you can do that. I mean, it's your property at that point. You can do what you want with it. With a leased car, you're basically returning it at the end of the lease, and your money is basically vanished into thin air. Let's say you get into a lease, and 6 months into the lease, your financial situation changes. Maybe you get laid off at work, or some expense comes up. Maybe there's an addition to your family, or there's some health situation that you got to go deal with. And you decide that you may not want to continue with this lease. Maybe it's too expensive for you. Maybe you just don't like the car you're driving and you think you want to get a different car. If you go to the dealer and try to terminate your lease, they're going to hit you with early termination fees of hundreds of dollars, maybe even thousands, depending on the kind of lease you negotiated to begin with. Dealers have a lot of leeway in terms of the fees that they can charge you in these situations. So this is a real problem if you're the kind of person who decides, I may want to drive a different car, a year into the lease, or you have some situation to deal with at that point in your life. Most leases come with a very specific mileage limit per year on the car that you lease. It could be 10,000 miles, it could be 12,000, maybe 15,000 on some leases. You have to be very careful to stay within the mileage limit when you're driving that car, because the dealer charges you anywhere from 25 to 30, 35 cents a mile for any mileage that you do on the car that is in excess of the agreed upon mileage. So let's say you agree to 12,000 miles a year and you have a few 100 miles extra at the end of the lease. You wind up paying quite a bit of money in extra mileage fees. So even if it's 25 cents a mile and you're 100 miles over, you wind up paying $25 for just that 100 miles. So you can see how this can add up pretty quickly. When you return a car at the end of a lease, you have to make sure that it's in pristine condition. Most dealers will nickel and dime you to death on little things like a nick here or a ding there or a little scratch here or something like that on the car, okay? So you have to really be careful how you take care of that car for the duration of the lease. And if there's some small issues with the car at the end of the lease, rest assured that the dealer is going to try and nickel and dime you for all the small stuff that's wrong with the car at that point. this can also add up to quite a bit of money in terms of these charges. If you're the kind of guy or gal that wants to customize your car, maybe you want to, give it a slightly different paint job, put some decals on it or something, or maybe make some modifications to it. That becomes a problem at the end of the lease too, because most leases are written to say that you are not allowed to modify the car in any significant way. Maybe you can have a professional tint job done on your windows or something like that. But beyond that, it's not a good idea to do any sort of modification on the car that you're leasing, because that could become a real problem at the end of your lease. And again, dealers have a lot of leeway in how they treat these situations at the end of the lease. So you may get hit with extra charges for the dealer to bring the car back to the condition that it was in when he leased it to you originally. At the end of a lease, when you're ready to turn your car back to the dealer, be prepared to pay up to $400 or $500 in fees at the end of the lease. The dealer will charge you for things like what they call a disposition fee. There's other paperwork fees that they slide in there. There's all kinds of fees that are actually spelled out in the contract, but that you may not be aware of unless you go through the contract with a fine-tooth comb. So this is something else you got to watch out for at the end of a lease. And this can turn into a pretty big expense as well. So as you can see, there's quite a few downsides to leasing a car. If you're a businessman and you're trying to lease a car because you could potentially use it as a business write-off to help that, with your tax return and things like that, that's a different situation. I'm talking to the guy that's making, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year on a job and is looking to be a little careful with his money. A lease is not a good idea for people in that situation. The typical used car these days can run you anywhere from $20,000 to $25,000. And the typical new car starts at about $25,000 to $30,000 and goes up from there. So obviously you have to be very careful how you approach this purchase. So as I pointed out now, a lease certainly has a lot of drawbacks. If you are the kind of guy that wants to be careful with your money, you may not want to consider a lease. I think an outright purchase of a car or taking a loan to pay for the car and buy it instead of leasing it would be a better approach for you. So definitely consider buying a car, not leasing it. Also, keep in mind that once your lease is up, the dealer could tempt you to go into another lease. Now, you're making a bad financial decision at that point if you decide to enter another lease, because your cycle of payments then just continues for another 3 years. You already lost the chance to build up any equity in the car that you leased earlier because you returned it. And now you're getting into the same situation again. So you're just continuing this cycle of payments with nothing to show for it at the end of the lease again. So as you can see, there's all these downsides to leasing a car. The most efficient use of your dollar is to actually purchase a car and keep driving that car well after the loan period is complete and you've paid the car off. That is what gets you the most bang for your buck. Cars these days are designed to easily be driven up to 150,000, 175,000 miles. So if you're driving this car, 15, 20,000 miles a year, you could easily drive it for several years after a 4-year loan has completed. So you should have no trouble if you take care of the car the way it should be taken care of, with proper maintenance, oil changes, routine maintenance at the recommended intervals and so on. Some people recommend that you keep the car until the point that it becomes uneconomical, no longer cost effective to continue maintaining it or repairing stuff that goes wrong with it. So you can easily keep a car and drive it for 10, 12 years and not have any problems with it. Basically, that's what gives you the most bang for your buck. You get the most value out of your car the longer you keep it, take care of it, and drive it carefully. So definitely consider purchasing a car. Leasing is not the way to go. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, consider giving it a like and share it with others who you think may benefit from it. And consider subscribing to this channel. Thank you.